October 1943. The weathered stone walls of Trent Park Mansion stood silently amid the rolling English countryside, its elegant Georgian architecture belying the critical intelligence work taking place within. Located just outside London, the sprawling estate had been requisitioned by British military intelligence and transformed into a specialized detention center for high-ranking German officers captured during the increasingly successful Allied campaigns. The autumn leaves drifted lazily across the manicured grounds where Wehrmacht generals and colonels strolled, enjoying privileges that would have shocked ordinary POWs confined to sparse camps across Britain. Here, the prisoners were served wine with dinner, offered recreational activities, and housed in comfortable quarters befitting their rank. Yet beneath this facade of hospitality lay one of the war's most audacious intelligence operations. An elaborate psychological game where every comfort offered was calculated to serve a purpose. Hidden microphones lurked behind paintings, beneath floorboards, and within light fixtures, capturing the unguarded conversations of men who believed themselves to be speaking in strict privacy. At the heart of this operation was Major Alexander Wallace, a 38-year-old former Oxford history professor whose soft-spoken manner and thoughtful demeanor masked one of the most brilliant psychological minds in British intelligence. Wallace stood by the window of his modest office, watching a small group of German officers playing chess in the garden below. His fingers unconsciously traced the scar running along his left temple, a souvenir from the trenches of the First World War that had left him with occasional migraines and a profound understanding of the German military mind. Unlike many of his colleagues who viewed their prisoners with undisguised contempt, Wallace maintained a more nuanced perspective. "They're men before their enemies," he often reminded his staff, "and understanding them as men is how we'll extract what we need." This philosophy had put him at odds with traditional interrogation specialists, who relied on aggressive questioning and intimidation. Those methods occasionally produced results, but Wallace had observed a troubling pattern. High-ranking officers trained to resist standard interrogation simply shut down, offering nothing beyond name, rank, and serial number. The intelligence drought had frustrated Allied command, particularly as the planning for the cross-channel invasion grew more urgent. Accurate information about German defensive preparations, troop deployments, and command structures would be essential for Operation Overlord's success. It was this critical need that had led to Wallace's unconventional approach being given a chance. Despite skepticism from military traditionalists, the major gathered his notes and headed toward the mansion's east wing where his latest challenge awaited. Colonel Heinrich Kramer, a decorated panzer commander captured during the fighting in Sicily, had proven particularly resistant to conventional questioning. 3 previous interrogators had failed to extract anything of value from him, each reporting that the colonel was disciplined, ideologically committed, and unlikely to cooperate. Wallace had requested permission to try his approach, which he had begun to call inverse interrogation. Rather than treating prisoners as subjects to be questioned, he engaged them as respected equals in conversations where information flowed both ways. The approach required detailed preparation and a deep understanding of psychology. "Gentlemen," Wallace had explained to his skeptical superiors, "the fundamental error in traditional interrogation is treating it as extraction rather than exchange. We attempt to pull information from unwilling subjects, which triggers their resistance. Instead, we must create scenarios where they willingly offer information, even while believing they're revealing nothing of importance." The cornerstone of Wallace's method was a carefully crafted illusion, the impression that British intelligence already possessed extensive knowledge about German operations, deployments, and plans. The guard snapped to attention as Wallace approached Kramer's quarters, a comfortable room that looked more like a country estate bedroom than a prison cell. "Good afternoon, Colonel," Wallace said in flawless German as he entered, carrying a tray with coffee and biscuits. "I thought we might continue our discussion about North African tank tactics. Your insights yesterday were most illuminating." Kramer, a tall man with steel-gray hair and the rigid posture of a career officer, acknowledged the greeting with a curt nod. Their previous meeting had been carefully orchestrated by Wallace as a casual conversation about desert warfare, a subject on which British forces had substantial experience. Wallace had shared actual tactical challenges faced by British tank commanders, creating an atmosphere of professional military exchange rather than interrogation. The major set down the tray and poured coffee for both of them, noting the slight relaxation in Kramer's shoulders. A small but significant indicator that the German officer was becoming more comfortable in his presence. "I've been reading Field Marshal Rommel's preliminary report on the battles at Kasserine Pass," Wallace mentioned casually, referencing a document that didn't actually exist. His analysis of American armor vulnerability was quite perceptive, though I found his assessment of their artillery support somewhat generous. The subtle shift in Kramer's expression, a momentary widening of the eyes, a slight furrow of the brow, told Wallace his gambit had succeeded. The German colonel was surprised by the apparent depth of British knowledge about internal Wehrmacht reports. "Rommel always had a soldier's respect for his adversaries," Kramer replied carefully, perhaps sometimes to a fault. The conversation continued in this vein, with Wallace strategically revealing accurate information about German operations that British intelligence had already confirmed, interspersed with deliberate inaccuracies or gaps. It was these carefully planned errors that formed the trap at the center of his method. Human nature compelled even disciplined officers to correct mistakes about their own experiences or expertise. Our analysis suggests the 21st Panzer Division had largely resolved their fuel supply issues by February, Wallace mentioned. Knowing this was incorrect, Kramer couldn't help himself. "No, that's not accurate," he corrected. "The supply problems persisted well into April. We were still rationing fuel for training exercises when I left for Sicily in May." In that single exchange, seemingly insignificant to Kramer, he had unwittingly confirmed the continuing logistical challenges facing German armored divisions, vital intelligence for Allied planners. The true genius of Wallace's approach lay in its psychological foundation. Traditional interrogation created an adversarial relationship that reinforced prisoners' resistance, framing any disclosure as a form of surrender or betrayal. Wallace instead established environments where prisoners could share information while maintaining their sense of honor and identity. He never pressed for specific details, instead allowing conversations to flow naturally around topics where he had carefully seeded informational gaps or errors. The prisoners, believing they were simply engaging in professional military discussions or correcting British misconceptions, frequently revealed crucial details about unit strengths, equipment conditions, and operational challenges. "The art is to make them feel intellectually superior," Wallace had explained to his team. "We present ourselves as generally well-informed but imperfect in our understanding." Their natural desire to demonstrate expertise, combined with their belief that they're not revealing anything we don't already know, overcomes their training to remain silent. The approach required patience. Intelligence emerged gradually across multiple conversations rather than in dramatic confessions. But the results had begun to impress even the most skeptical military commanders. Wallace's interactions with Colonel Kramer continued over several weeks, each carefully documented and analyzed. The conversations ranged across military history, philosophical discussions about the nature of warfare, and seemingly casual exchanges about life in Germany before the war. Throughout these discussions, Wallace maintained the illusion that British intelligence possessed comprehensive knowledge about German military operations. When Kramer inadvertently revealed new information, Wallace showed no reaction that might alert the colonel to his disclosure. "The 12th SS Panzer Division has been having difficulty integrating their new recruits," Kramer mentioned during one conversation about training protocols. "The quality of the replacements isn't what it was earlier in the war." Wallace merely nodded, as though this was common knowledge, while making a mental note of this valuable insight into German manpower challenges. The transcripts from these conversations, combined with intelligence from hidden microphones capturing Kramer's discussions with fellow prisoners, gradually built a detailed picture of German defensive preparations, command structures, and morale that would prove invaluable for Allied planning. What made Wallace's technique particularly effective was that prisoners like Kramer never realized how much information they had divulged. Indeed, many maintained until the war's end that they had revealed nothing of significance during their captivity. The pale winter light filtered through the curtains of General Montgomery's headquarters as Wallace presented his latest intelligence synthesis. The room was crowded with senior officers studying maps of the French coastline, where Allied forces would eventually land. "Gentlemen, based on information extracted from prisoners at Trent Park, we now have confirmation that the Atlantic Wall defenses remain incomplete along several sections of the Normandy coastline," Wallace indicated specific areas on the map. Additionally, we've learned that fuel shortages continue to hamper German training exercises, meaning many of the units positioned in northern France have limited practical experience with coordinated defensive operations. The intelligence Wallace provided wasn't merely tactical, it offered insights into the psychology and morale of German forces. His conversations had revealed growing pessimism among senior officers about Germany's ability to repel an Allied invasion. Several prisoners have independently confirmed that reinforcements are increasingly composed of younger, less experienced soldiers, Wallace noted. There's particular concern about the eastern units transferred to the Atlantic Wall, many of which have never trained for coastal defense operations. General Montgomery, initially skeptical of Wallace's methods, had become one of his strongest advocates. "Your conversations have given us more actionable intelligence than a year of traditional interrogations," he acknowledged. As spring 1944 approached and preparations for Operation Overlord entered their final phase, Wallace's methods had become an established component of Allied intelligence gathering. The prisoners at Trent Park, enjoying their comfortable captivity with good food, intellectual stimulation, and respectful treatment, had unwittingly contributed critical information to the invasion planning. The success of Wallace's approach ultimately rested on a profound understanding of human psychology, the need for respect, the desire to demonstrate expertise, and the tendency to lower one's guard in seemingly casual conversations. By creating an environment where prisoners could share information while maintaining their self-image as loyal German officers, he had circumvented the psychological barriers that traditional interrogation methods couldn't overcome. The most effective form of interrogation, Wallace later wrote in his classified post-war report, is the one where the subject never believes they are being interrogated at all. The intelligence gathered through these methods would help shape the Allied invasion strategy, identifying vulnerabilities in German defenses and providing insights into the command dynamics that would influence the enemy's response to the landings. The early morning fog shrouded the Normandy coastline on June 6, 1944, as Allied forces began the largest amphibious landing in military history. Among the intelligence officers monitoring the operation was Major Alexander Wallace, whose work had contributed significantly to the planning of this momentous assault. The information gleaned from his conversations with German prisoners had helped identify weaknesses in the Atlantic Wall, insights into German command response protocols, and details about defensive capabilities that informed the selection of landing sites. As reports of the initial landings filtered in, Wallace reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. His unconventional methods, once dismissed by military traditionalists, had ultimately proven their worth in the crucible of warfare. The success of his approach had fundamentally changed how military intelligence viewed psychological techniques in prisoner interrogation, establishing principles that would influence intelligence gathering for decades to come. The most profound lesson, Wallace believed, was that understanding human psychology could be more powerful than any form of coercion. By engaging prisoners with respect and creating environments where information flowed naturally through conversation rather than extraction, he had demonstrated that the most effective way to make someone reveal everything was to make them believe they were revealing nothing at all. The legacy of Wallace's inverse interrogation methods extended far beyond the Normandy landings. As Allied forces pushed across Europe toward Germany, the intelligence gathered at Trent Park continued to provide valuable insights into German military thinking, command structures, and strategic decisions. The transcripts of prisoner conversations, analyzed alongside the information gleaned from Wallace's directed discussions, created a comprehensive picture of the deteriorating situation within the Wehrmacht. Perhaps most significantly, these methods extracted information while preserving human dignity, a stark contrast to the brutal interrogation tactics employed by totalitarian regimes. In the decades following the war, military and intelligence organizations worldwide studied Wallace's techniques, recognizing that psychological understanding could often accomplish what force could not. His approach demonstrated that effective intelligence gathering need not conflict with humanitarian principles, establishing an ethical framework that would influence generations of interrogation specialists. The stone walls of Trent Park eventually returned to civilian use, the hidden microphones removed, and the prisoners repatriated, But the lessons learned there about human psychology, dignity, and the subtle art of conversation transformed how intelligence professionals approached their craft. In warfare, as in peace, understanding the human mind proved to be the most powerful tool of all. The Mediterranean sun cast long shadows across the Sicilian villa, where Wallace had established a forward intelligence operation in the summer of 1943, before his Trent Park success. The whitewashed walls and terracotta roof stood in stark contrast to the destruction visible in the nearby town, where the recent fighting had left buildings shattered and streets cratered. It was here that Wallace had first refined his techniques, working with lower-ranking prisoners before applying them to the high-value officers at Trent Park. His early experiments had revealed the power of creating psychological spaces where prisoners felt intellectually respected, while subtly being led to reveal information they would never divulge under direct questioning. The traditional interrogator asks, "What do you know about the 10th Panzer Division?" Wallace explained to a young intelligence officer as they walked through the villa's garden. The prisoner immediately recognizes this as an attempt to extract information and resists. Instead, we might say, "Our reports indicate the 10th Panzer Division has been experiencing mechanical failures with their new Mark IV tanks." Now the prisoner faces a different psychological calculation. We already seem to know about the 10th Panzer, so withholding basic information serves no purpose. Moreover, if our statement contains an inaccuracy, many prisoners feel compelled to correct it, particularly if they have direct knowledge. The fundamental insight that drove Wallace's approach was that human beings rarely calculate the cumulative intelligence value of seemingly innocuous disclosures. A prisoner might vigilantly guard specific military secrets while freely discussing daily life in their unit, not recognizing that details about ration quality, mail delivery, or recreational activities could reveal crucial information about supply situations, communications efficiency, and morale. Wallace's background in history and psychology had taught him that comprehensive understanding rarely came from single revelations, but rather emerged from patterns identified across many small disclosures. His methods capitalized on this reality, gathering information through conversations that prisoners perceived as inconsequential. By maintaining the illusion that British intelligence already possessed extensive knowledge about German operations, he created a psychological environment where prisoners would fill in gaps or correct misunderstandings without recognizing the intelligence value of their contributions. The approach required immense patience and attention to detail, with insights often emerging only when information from multiple conversations was synthesized. Unlike the dramatic confessions depicted in films, real intelligence work involved the painstaking assembly of countless fragments into a coherent picture. After the war, Wallace's methods influenced the development of interrogation protocols across Western intelligence services. The principles he established, creating non-adversarial environments, presenting pre-existing knowledge to encourage corrections and elaborations, avoiding direct questioning that triggers resistance, became foundational elements in intelligence training. His techniques proved particularly valuable during the Cold War, where ideologically committed agents required sophisticated psychological approaches rather than coercive methods. Wallace himself remained largely unknown to the public, his contributions classified for decades after the conflict ended. He returned to academic life, teaching history at Cambridge while occasionally consulting with intelligence services on psychological approaches to information gathering. His wartime experiences had left him with a profound appreciation for the complexity of human motivation and the power of creating environments where information flows naturally rather than under compulsion. The most effective interrogation, he often told his students, is the conversation where both participants forget that interrogation is occurring at all. The techniques he pioneered at Trent Park demonstrated that understanding human psychology could be more powerful than any form of physical or emotional pressure, a lesson that transformed how democratic nations approached the delicate balance between security needs and ethical principles in intelligence gathering. The winds of history swept across Europe, transforming battlefields into farmland once more and allowing the slow healing of war-torn nations. The lessons learned in places like Trent Park remained, however, preserved in classified archives and training protocols that guided a new generation of intelligence professionals. The methods developed by Alexander Wallace and others like him represented more than just effective techniques. They embodied the principle that democratic values need not be sacrificed in the pursuit of security. By demonstrating that psychological understanding could achieve what coercion could not, they established an approach to intelligence gathering that respected human dignity even in the darkest circumstances of war. The true legacy of these innovative methods wasn't merely the information they extracted, crucial though it was to the Allied victory. Their deeper contribution was proving that effectiveness and ethics could coexist, even when facing existential threats. In an age of increasing complexity, where information has become the most valuable currency of power, this insight remains as relevant as ever. For in understanding the human mind, its needs, motivations, and psychological patterns, we discover not just the means to gather intelligence, but a pathway to maintain our humanity. While doing so, you stand today on the beaches of Normandy, where Allied forces landed in that fateful summer of 1944. You might reflect on how the success of that operation depended not just on military might, but on intelligence gathered through conversations in an English country house. The invisible threads that connect psychological insight to battlefield victory remind us that warfare exists in the realm of mind as much as matter. The quiet triumph of approaches like Wallace's inverse interrogation demonstrates that understanding human psychology can sometimes accomplish what force cannot, a lesson that extends far beyond military applications. In our modern world, where information flows freely yet genuine understanding remains elusive, perhaps we might learn from this historical example that the most profound insights often emerge not from confrontation, but from conversation, not from demands, but from dialogue. The stone walls of Trent Park stand as a silent testament to this principle, reminding us that in war, as in peace, the path to truth often winds through the complex landscape of the human mind.